Hey, I'm making a short video about the P. Diddy Illuminati thingy, you know. There's some people who are taking the P. Diddy situation, just like they took the Jeffrey Epstein situation, as an opportunity to reaffirm various different folklore theories about how the world works. And I understand why that's a popular response because we always think we're seeing confirmation of, oh, well, we saw Jeffrey Epstein and his cabal, and we see Diddy has a sort of cabal, therefore Illuminati. And, celebrities have jokingly played around with Illuminati signs for years. And not just like A-list celebrities, random internet people. It's been a meme, okay? It's a meme. So you can't take that as hard evidence. If anything, people just trolling each other. On the other hand, one of the things I'm trying to make clear is that occultism is actually rampant. And some people say, who cares? Who cares? Fact is, 1 out of 4 Americans has dabbled in the occult, according to surveys. And when I say dabbled in the occult, I mean has literally read, tried to practice some sort of formal system at some point in their life. Whether that be mastering the tarot deck or getting into, numerology or whatever. 1 out of 4 Americans has put real effort into it, and as many as half of Americans believe in the supernatural in terms of things like sixth sense, ghosts inhabiting buildings, various different spiritual, you know, interpretations of reality. So we're not even talking about religion here. We're saying 1/2 of Americans have some sort of supernatural, spiritual, you know, tendencies in their beliefs, superstitious beliefs, you might say. And 1/4 of them have spent a good effort on it. So you'd say, well, who cares, right? If everybody's doing it, who cares that there's occult waves? There's a difference between the occult and the cult, and it's a subtle difference where a cult is more often than not a deeper commitment, a social group that is not merely playing around with ideas, but is actually committed to take action. That means they structure their lives for at least a period of time deeply around some sort of beliefs and rituals that are eccentric and extreme. And, I've done other videos to define a cult, and I'm not going to go through the definition of a cult here again. Most people kind of know what that is. But I am delineating between the occult and why we should care. So, how many celebrities are linking their hedonistic behaviors to occult explanations of reality? That's the important question in this video. It's not how many celebrities are part of this single cabal called the Illuminati. That's ridiculous. If you've ever been to a local, I don't know, role-playing group, college students or whatever, and they're playing Magic the Gathering, doing, role-playing games, whatever, they dabble in spells and occult and whatever. Doesn't mean they're taking it that seriously. And some do and some don't. You have some who are Wiccan and some who go full on Satanism or whatever. But what they're really doing is they're exploring all the alternative explanations of reality, which are anti-authoritarian, which would counter the authoritarian narrative of society. And that's not too dangerous. That's just kids being kids. That's just rebellion. It's just a natural cycle. And there's a reason why many mainstream religions build that into their explanations of maturation process. Is they basically say, kids go on a Rumspringe, like the Amish say, um, 16 to 25, they rebel against everything, they question, they challenge everything. And then at the end of that, they're supposed to grow up and mature. And then they want back into society because they realize that it works and that most of the basic moral principles and rules of society are worth buying into. The movie SLC Punk covers this thoroughly about how most punks grow up. And they remember their period fondly. So this is the important thing. Those who went through Rumspringa remember it fondly as much as they were traumatized by it. It's dangerous stuff. It's rites of passage, and people can get hurt and some people die from drugs and yada, yada, yada and ruin their lives. But then they're glad they went through it and they remember it for the rest of their lives and they come back to society. Fine. Okay. Predators abuse Rumspringa. I'm going to blow all your minds right now. You see, in mainstream culture, we create a safe space, college, for example, for people to test their beliefs and challenge authority and get too drunk and get forgiven and get a second or third chance on that test and so on and so forth. And it's so important to people's identities that they play around with all these things: identity, culture, rules, morality, where they want to go with their life. Fine. There's safe ways to do that, and that's what most professors, teachers, and community leaders are all there to do, is to help guide people through all that. Now, the opposite of that are, like Pinocchio is the honest John and wants to take you to Pleasure Island. I love Pinocchio. It's one of the best myths of all time. And the Disney version is just phenomenal. In fact, all the early Disney movies were phenomenal because they all had that level of mythos that they were creating something deep for American psyches. And Honest John tempts Pinocchio into a variety of temptations. And Pinocchio innocently goes along with it, seeking his quest to be a real boy. Well, so what if you have people in the entertainment business, the United States, Hollywood, the Grammys, that instead of actually trying to create a safe Rumspringa for their youth, are truly trying to corrupt them and exploit them? They're deep predators. And they live in the same space as some other people who are trying to do it innocently. So Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider, classic example. Nickelodeon is trying to create a safe space for kids to challenge authority and grow up, and discover themselves. And unfortunately, within that so-called safe space, there's also very dangerous people like Dan Schneider and his cronies who have snuck their way in to those spaces and preyed on people. Okay. It doesn't really matter what space we're talking about and what culture we're talking about. The statistics play out to be roughly 5% of the predators roughly 5% are the predators. Okay. These are people who chose the left hand path. They chose, instead of being honest authority figures, honest guides for the youth, honest guides for their culture, they chose to pervert their role as a authority figure to tempt and destroy and corrupt for their own aggrandizement, to self-deify, to make themselves a deity, not an ordinary person. Just like Sean Combs would be an ordinary person, but Diddy is a deity. These are people who attempt to deify themselves and use and exploit the youth repeatedly as their source of power. And there's a lot of myths about this. It's one of the most commonly told myths in cultural history. And it's, the Pied Piper in a certain sense. But basically, the idea is that the corrupting force is the most powerful version of the left-hand path. Aleister Crowley taught it, and he got it from other people who got it from other people who got it from other people. It's cults on top of cults on top of cults. Children of God, whatever. And the idea is this. They deify themselves through the corruption of youth via sexuality and hedonism and the confusion of sex with love. And let me be more clear, not sex, but the confusion of the definition of love and perversion. And let me be even more clear. When I say perversion, I'm not speaking just in rudimentary, let's say right-wing Christian terms about perversion. What I mean is that the perversion is a theft, like a rape. Okay. It's a deception. It is a manipulation. It is where you don't have true consent and you're not playing a game and you're not just having fun. You are absolutely positively twisting, abusing, manipulating, stealing, taking something that is not your own as your fetish. These are, the dark manipulative forces, sort of like we have sympathy for Fagin in Oliver, Fagin the pickpocket king, who takes care of all the children, but also takes their money. And we may think he's a bit of an abuser as well. There's a lot of signs and symbols in this character of Fagin that he's abusing the children and grooming them and whatever. But at the same time, we have sympathy for him because in his twisted, perverted world, he actually loves them. So, this now we only give him some sort of compassion because Fagin is a nobody and he's taking care of the street urchins nobody else would take care of. Now, P. Diddy is the opposite. He's trying to steal all of the most important, beautiful, powerful talent he can find. He doesn't give a shit about the street urchins. Jay-Z and Diddy both had some experience with understanding with what poverty looks like and the lowest level looks like. And they vowed to never be that. And instead, they became emotionally fixated and obsessed with stealing and taking control of everything that they never had before. They really wanted wealth and power and glory at all costs. They'd do anything for it. And they knew they would have to continually steal other people's spirit, truth, wisdom, purpose, and nothing was ever going to be enough for them. And they were both attracted to the left-hand path, which is the idea in esoteric wisdom in the Eastern and Western philosophical traditions that self-deification is a form of liberation, where you get to rebel against God and society and deify yourself. Well, they both were familiar with Black supremacist groups like the 5% Nation, who taught self-deification, the nation of gods and earths. The nation of gods, man, and earth's Black woman, who were original gods and could self-deify. Now, this is a Fagin-like story. We're telling the lowest of the low in New York City, Brooklyn, and in the Bronx. And you're nothing. Nobody cares about you. You are at the lowest of the low. You're the street urchins of New York City. You're in gang reform programs. By the time you're 14, 15, 16, you're absolutely a sob story of the worst part of American history. And in walks Clarence 13X, and he tells you, you are the original Asiatic Black men, and we will deify you. And here's your grand ciphers and your spells and your weaponry, and you're going to use this in your raps and your ciphers to do real magic. You're going to deify yourselves. And God damn it, it worked. It worked. They deified themselves. They were able to actually overcome most of their limitations and to create opportunities for themselves that otherwise never could have. However, it was corrupt because the self-deification lesson that they were taught was very open-ended. There were so many questions that were not answered about what the real world was going to be like once you got past your youth, your Rumspringe. Once you found your way in, what kind of world were you actually going to create for everybody in the world? And how many lies would have to be undone for you to realize that the cult that you were taught was a cult? It got you moving in the right direction, but it told you so many lies. Like, white people were invented by a scientist 6,000 years ago named Yakub. That's anthropologically false. There were already people in Europe over 30,000 years ago throughout the entire continent that were Caucasian, 5 times older than the supposed creation of the white race by some mad scientist. Oh, and that all Black people came from Egypt? No, that's ridiculous. They came from all over the African continent, and the settling of Egypt was a very late activity in African history. You have genetic evidence of tribes with local presence all over Africa a million years ago, but most of the people who settled in Egypt came less than 20,000 years ago. So how can all Black people be from Egypt when they were from all over? It doesn't make any sense. But these are some of the types of bizarre beliefs that were used to build up the 5% Nation. And why are they called 5%ers? They're the only 5% that are enlightened. There's 10% that rule us, and the other 85% are in the dark. Here's the thing. Roughly 5% of the population are predators. The 5% Nation is the nation of predators, in theory, who are put to good use. In other words, what Clarence 13X was trying to do was to find the most hopeless, destitute, predatorial, nasty, violent, tough, bad, children, juvenile delinquents, and telling them they were the gods. The gangsters. Okay? It's like going to the Italians telling the five families of New York that they were actually the heart and soul of the Italian identity when they represented 5% of the Italian identity. Pretty much the same thing, but deifying. Okay. So in walks people like Jay-Z and Diddy. They grew up in that culture. They grew up aware of it. They grew up aware that most of hip hop was dominated by these sorts of esoteric beliefs. They were trained and mentored in a lot of these ideas, not just the five percenters, but also the Zulu Nation, the Nuwabians, the Moors, Dr. Malachi York, who actually turned out to be the biggest pedophile in American history, or the leader of the Universal Zulu Nation, who were a bunch of really nice people. But Africa Bambaataa, the leader, turned out to be a pedophile. Clarence 13X was probably a pedophile. Um, um, he was kicked out from the Nation of Islam for being loving drugs and drinking and gambling and sex and not being willing to withhold those things from children. The Nation of Islam said you shouldn't teach these sorts of things to children, and Clarence 13X taught the children that these things were acceptable as long as they practiced the Nation of God's and Earth's teachings. And wouldn't you know, they grew up to be P. Diddy and Jay-Z. Yeah. So a good portion of the hip hop royalty who chose these paths were unfortunately misled. And it's a shame because they learned a lot of great value um, from their teachers, a lot of things that really lifted them out of darkness, just like Fagin, also some perversion of reality. And so now, flash forward today, you have people like Diddy, and they're like, Illuminati, Illuminati. So if you knew the real history of hip hop, you would realize that it came from within the Black culture itself. And you could perhaps argue that the CIA or somebody planted Clarence 13X or Africa Bambaataa or whatever, but that's a stretch. No, the thing is, each one of these people who started their own cults read other occult literature. They borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and read from other occult sources and got inspirations and ideas, just like how Haitians are inspired by voodoo who come to the United States. Um, it's because when you are living in the rough parts of town, cults tend to dominate, and you tend to trust them more than you do the oppressor religion. You don't trust anybody. And so, long story short, how do we end up with Diddy and Jay-Z and these sorts of forms of exploitation? It's called the left-hand path. It's these esoteric groups that plant themselves into communities, and they do it at two levels, the upper class and the lower class. And that's what they have in common. And so when the lower class, like Jay-Z and Diddy, become the upper class, guess who they bond with? They bond with the left-hand path occultists that mirror what they learned that brought them up. Does this mean it's Illuminati? No, it means left-hand path occultism exists persistently in the upper class and the lower class. And it tends to be the bonds, just like how gay culture can be a fast track from the bottom to the top if you screw your way to the top, or sex clubs if you screw your way to the top. Well, the thing is, occult and esoteric practices and secret societies will help you get to the top really fast. And they usually exploit you because it's mostly about sex and hedonism and drugs and the idea that, it's an underworld. And unfortunately, a very large percentage of the occult and esoteric religious practice is just, the bricks and mortar of the underworld. And this is true for thousands of years. You go back to the dawn of civilization, and esoteric groups and societies and secret societies were these, oh, you can get it to the top. All you have to do is screw your way to the top, or sell drugs on your way to the top, or cheat your way to the top. It's one of the oldest stories of civilization. So here you have the glamorized Jay-Z's and P. Diddy's, and they look like Jeffrey Epstein's. And the reason why is because they were willing to commit systemic crimes, cover them up, be the cool guy, be able to wear multiple faces, just like a mobster can wear multiple faces, and yet also represent, their community, the Black supremacy ideology of their esotericism. And just, it's amazing that they stay sane at all. But long story short, the one way that we usually recognize them is that they share the common perversions: pedophilia, grooming youth, corrupting them as opposed to liberating them during the Rumspringe, recruiting them to the highest levels of corruption, and trying to find the perfect corrupt forces, like the Cardi B's and the Nicki Minaj's, where you're like, you are the ideal stripper turned gangster turned face for our people. You're the perfect sexual image that we can use to control the masses. And if you work with us, then we will pimp you. And then you can be this witch, goddess, whatever, and manipulate people and become super important as opposed to being a nobody. And that's the grooming process, is getting people so high on self-deification, being with the inner circle of self-deified people, that they support each other in that message. Now, you'll find that avant-garde spaces, entertainment spaces, high art, high music spaces are loaded with this inner circle practice of breaking all the rules, skipping all the ordinary paths, all the talent rules, and engineering your own unique alternative to the traditional paths. And then in repayment for being part of that team, you're going to elevate everybody else who does the same thing. Now, this is classic left-hand path occultist teaching, which is you create chaos in society using your magic and your mind over matter. If you want it enough badly, you'll have it. All sexual morality is to be upturned. Keeping secrets becomes the currency. And essentially the undoing, the unraveling of all the unfair institutions. And so, long story short, it's one of the oldest tales of civilization. We're seeing it play out right now. It's not Illuminati. People find their own way to the same thing. It's a business model. It's a hack. You could find it 1,000 different ways. The left-hand path can be found 1,000 different ways. You don't need to have a single conspiracy or a single Illuminati. You can recreate it yourself without even having good mentors. You can figure it out. You could start your own gang. You could start your own occult organization or practice, but it predominantly has to do with mass manipulation, mind control, hard effort to confuse and manipulate people, and most importantly, to corrupt them and to steal their energy. To take whatever honest and sincere and good energy, any power they have to offer or give the world, and to twist it to your own desires and ends. And this is the International League of Sociopaths. Some people call it the Illuminati. But what I'm telling you is it doesn't have to be any unified religion or occult group. All it has to do is to be sociopaths who create occult, or religious uh, uh, kind of rigor behind their sociopathology or psychopathology. In other words, trying to systematize their own sociopathology, their own misanthropic tendencies into something that could be ritualized, spiritualized, and taught as an inversion of power against anybody who would stand in their way. That's what we're dealing with. And there's hundreds of faces of it. And we can talk about symbols or individual versions or practices of how to do it. But the golden thing is, it doesn't really matter what the cult's name is or what the cult's individual practices. Does it, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And they recognize their own kind. They hate each other. They try to kill each other. They also form alliances. It's the world of the sociopaths, the 5%. Okay. The 10%, let's talk about the nations of God. I'm going to end this in a second, but the 10% from the nation of gods of earth are the 10% who follow in orthodoxy. Yeah, they have their own problems. I'm not going to necessarily say everyone through the orthodoxy is amazing. They have a lot of their own problems, but at least they have the beaten path of civilization to try to keep things in order. The 5%, the 5%ers, are those who attempt to use the left-hand path to invert the orthodoxy and to break all taboos to their own benefit. Sometimes cynically, respectably, understandably, but more often than not, ultimately, they need to grow up. And the long story short is that most people who dabble in the 5% messages do grow up. Many of the aging hip hop stars left it. Many of the aging occultists left it. Many of the aging children who participated in the Rumspringe societies and underworlds left it, the gangs and whatever. You don't ever leave it in the fact that it's always a part of your identity, that it was part of your formative relationships. But you also make peace with the orthodoxy and you minimize the amount of crimes you commit. You don't do it for hedonism, for pleasure, for fun. You only do it as a last resort. And on the other extreme, if you've got a P. Diddy, he never grew up. He got worse and worse and worse. And Jeffrey Epstein was the same. These are people who played with the devil and only got worse. Okay, that's the end of it.